Anton Chekhov, Ariadne. On the deck of a steamer sailing from Odessa to Sevastopol, a gentleman, rather handsome, with a neat, rounded beard, approached me to ask for a light. He said, "Take a look at those Germans sitting by the deck house. When Germans or Englishmen gather, they talk about wool prices, the harvest, or their private affairs. But for some reason, when we Russians get together, we talk of nothing but women and high-minded abstractions. Mostly, though, about women." The man's face was already familiar to me. Only the day before, we had traveled on the same train from abroad. In Volochysk, during the customs inspection, I had seen him standing with a lady, his companion, before a mountain of trunks and baskets filled with dresses. He looked utterly overwhelmed and crushed when he had to pay duty on some silk trifle, while his companion protested and threatened to lodge a formal complaint. Later, on the way to Odessa, I saw him carrying pastries and oranges to the ladies' compartment. It was a damp day with a slight swell, and the ladies had retired to their cabins. The gentleman with the rounded beard sat down beside me and continued, "Yes, when Russians meet, they speak only of lofty matters and women. We are so intellectual, so solemn, that we utter nothing but eternal truths and can only deign to solve questions of the highest order. A Russian actor doesn't know how to be playful. Even in a light vaudeville, he plays his part with profound gravity. We are the same. When we must speak of trifles, we treat them only from the loftiest point of view. It is a lack of courage, sincerity, and simplicity. As for why we talk about women so often, I think it's because we're dissatisfied. We view women through a lens that is far too idealistic, demanding things from them that reality simply cannot provide. We receive far less than we desire, and the result is frustration, broken hopes, and heartache. And as they say, a man speaks most of what hurts him. I hope I'm not boring you." "Not at all," I replied. "In that case, allow me to introduce myself," my companion said, rising slightly. "Ivan Ilyich Shamokhin, a Moscow landowner of a sort. I, however, know you quite well." He sat back down and continued, looking into my face with a warm, sincere gaze. A second-rate philosopher, like Max Nordau, would explain this constant talk about women as erotic madness or a lingering serf-owner mentality. I see it differently. I repeat, we're dissatisfied because we are idealists. We want the beings who give birth to us and our children to be superior to us, superior to everything in the world. When we are young, we poeticize and idolize those we fall in love with. To us, love and happiness are synonyms. In Russia, a marriage without love is held in contempt. Sensuality is seen as ridiculous or even repulsive. The most successful novels are those where women are beautiful, poetic, and refined. If a Russian man gazes in rapture at a Raphael Madonna or frets over women's emancipation, I assure you, there is nothing affected about it. But here is the trouble. No sooner do we marry or start living with a woman than 2 or 3 years pass, and we already feel disillusioned and deceived. We try another, and again, disappointment, again, horror. In the end, we convince ourselves that women are false, petty, vain, unfair, undeveloped, and cruel. In short, not only not superior to us, but immeasurably beneath us. And we, the dissatisfied and the deceived, have nothing left to do but grumble and talk incessantly of that which so cruelly betrayed our expectations. As Shamokhin spoke, I noticed that the Russian language and the Russian surroundings gave him great pleasure. This was likely because he had been desperately homesick while abroad. While praising Russians and ascribing to them a rare idealism, he did not speak ill of foreigners, which disposed me in his favor. It was also clear that his soul was troubled. He wanted to talk more about himself than about women in general, and I sensed I was destined to hear some long, confession-like story. And indeed, when we had ordered a bottle of wine and finished a glass each, he began. I remember in some story by Veltman, a character says, "Now, there's a story," and another replies, "No, that is not a story. It is only the introduction to a story." So, everything I've said so far is just an introduction. What I actually want to tell you is the story of my last romance. Forgive me, I must ask again, are you sure you aren't bored? I told him I was not, and he continued. The setting is the Moscow province, in one of its northern districts. The nature there, I must tell you, is breathtaking. Our estate sits on the high bank of a swift little river, at a spot they call the Roaring Place, where the water rushes day and night. Imagine a large old garden, cozy flower beds, an apiary, a kitchen garden. Below is the river with tufted willows that look matte and silvered, like gray hair when the dew is heavy. On the other side is a meadow, and beyond that, on a hill, a formidable dark forest. In that forest, mushrooms grow in countless numbers, and elks live in the deepest thickets. Even when I die and they nail my coffin shut, I think I will still dream of those early mornings when the sun is so bright it hurts your eyes, or those wondrous spring evenings when the nightingales and corncrakes call in the garden. A concertina plays in the distance, a piano sound from the house, and the river rushes. In short, music that makes you want to weep and sing at the top of your lungs. Our arable land is small, but the meadows and woods bring in about 2,000 a year. I'm an only son. My father and I are modest people, and that money, plus his pension, was quite enough. For the first 3 years after university, I lived in the country, managing the estate and waiting to be elected to some office. But mainly, I was deeply in love with an extraordinarily beautiful and charming girl. She was the sister of my neighbor, Kotlovich, a ruined gentleman who had pineapples, remarkable peaches, lightning rods, and a fountain in his courtyard, but not a kopeck to his name. He did nothing, knew how to do nothing, and was somehow flabby, as if made of steamed turnip. He treated the peasants with homeopathy and practiced spiritualism. He was, to be fair, a delicate, gentle, and not unintelligent man, but I have no soul for those gentlemen who converse with spirits and treat village women with magnetism. Firstly, people who are not mentally free always have a muddle of concepts, making it extremely difficult to talk to them. Secondly, they usually love no one and live without women, and that air of mystery has an unpleasant effect on sensitive people. Even his appearance put me off. He was tall, stout, and pale, with a tiny head, small glittering eyes, and white fleshy fingers. He didn't shake your hand. He needed it, and he was forever apologizing. If he asked for something, forgive me. If he gave something, forgive me again. As for his sister, she was a person from a completely different opera. I should mention that I didn't know the Kotlovics in my childhood or youth. My father was a professor in N, and we lived in the provinces for a long time. By the time I met them, this girl was already 22. She had long since finished her studies at the Institute and spent 2 or 3 years in Moscow with a wealthy aunt who introduced her to society. When we were introduced, and I spoke with her for the first time, I was struck above all by her rare and beautiful name, Ariadne. It suited her perfectly. She was a brunette very thin, very slender, supple, and exceptionally graceful, with elegant and highly noble features. Her eyes glittered too, but while her brother's eyes had a cold, sugary glint like hard candy, her gaze shone with a beautiful, proud youthfulness. She conquered me on the very first day. It could not have been otherwise. Those first impressions were so powerful that even now I cannot shake my illusions. I still want to believe that when nature created this girl, it had some grand, miraculous design in mind. Ariadne's voice, her stride, her hat, even the prints of her small feet on the sandy bank where she fished for gudgeon. Everything filled me with joy and a passionate thirst for life. From her beautiful face and form, I judged her soul, and every word she spoke, every smile she gave, enchanted me. They won me over and led me to assume she possessed a lofty spirit. She was affectionate, talkative, cheerful, and easy in her manner. She had a poetic belief in God and spoke poetically about death. There was such a wealth of nuance in her personality that she could make even her flaws seem like special, charming qualities. Suppose she decided she needed a new horse, but there was no money. Well, where's the harm? Something could be sold or pawned. And if the steward swore there was nothing left to sell or pawn, one could always strip the iron roofs off the outbuildings and send them to the factory, or take the plow horses to the market at the height of the harvest and sell them for a pittance. These unbridled whims sometimes drove the entire estate to despair, but she expressed them with such grace that, in the end, everything was forgiven and allowed, as if she were a goddess or the wife of Caesar. My love was touching, and soon everyone noticed it. My father, the neighbors, the peasants. Everyone sympathized with me. When I happened to treat the laborers to vodka, they would bow and say, "God grant you marry the Kotlovich lady." Ariadne herself knew that I loved her. She often came to visit us on horseback or in a chaise, sometimes spending entire days with me and my father. She became close friends with my old man. He even taught her to ride a bicycle, his favorite pastime. I remember one evening they were getting ready to ride, and I helped her onto the bicycle. At that moment, she was so beautiful that I felt as if touching her would burn my hands. I trembled with delight, and when they both, the old man and she, both handsome and slender, pedaled away down the highway, a black horse ridden by a passing steward reared to the side. It seemed to me the animal bolted simply because it, too, was struck by her beauty. My love and devotion touched Ariadne, moving her to pity, and she desperately wanted to be as enchanted as I was, to return my love. It was, after all, so poetic, but she was incapable of loving truly, as I did, for she was cold and already quite corrupted. A demon lived within her, whispering day and night that she was enchanting and divine. Having no clear idea of what she was created for or what her life was meant to be, she imagined her future only as one of great wealth and nobility. She dreamed of balls, horse races, liveries, luxurious drawing rooms, her own salon, and a whole swarm of counts, princes, ambassadors, famous artists, and actors, all worshiping her, all admiring her beauty and her gowns. This thirst for power and personal success, these constant thoughts in a single direction, tend to harden people. And so, Ariadne was cold. Cold to me, cold to nature, and cold to music. Time passed, but the ambassadors were nowhere to be seen. Ariadne continued to live with her spiritualist brother. Their affairs grew worse and worse, until she had no money for dresses or hats, and had to resort to trickery and maneuvering to hide her poverty. As luck would have it, while she was still living with her aunt in Moscow, a certain Prince Maktub, a wealthy but utterly insignificant man, had proposed to her. She had rejected him flatly, but now she was sometimes gnawed by a worm of regret. Why had she refused? Just as our peasant might blow in disgust on a bowl of kvass with a cockroach in it, yet drink it anyway, she would grimace at the memory of the prince, but still say to me, "Say what you will, but there is something inexplicable, something magnetic about a title." She dreamed of titles and splendor, yet at the same time, she didn't want to let me go. No matter how much one dreams of ambassadors, the heart is not a stone, and one feels sorry for one's own passing youth. Ariadne tried to fall in love. She made a show of it, and even swore her love to me. But I am a sensitive, nervous man. When I am loved, I feel it even at a distance, without oaths or assurances. Here, however, I felt only a chill. When she spoke to me of love, it felt as though I were listening to the song of a mechanical nightingale. Ariadne herself realized she lacked the spark. It frustrated her, and more than once I saw her weep. And then, can you imagine? She suddenly embraced me impulsively and kissed me. It happened one evening on the riverbank. I looked into her eyes and saw that she did not love me. She had embraced me out of mere curiosity, to test herself, to see what would come of it. And I felt a sense of dread. I took her by the hands and said in despair, "These caresses without love cause me nothing but suffering." "What an odd man you are," she said with annoyance, and walked away. In all probability, another year or two would have passed, and I would have married her, and that would have been the end of the story. But fate saw fit to arrange our romance differently. It happened that a new personality appeared on our horizon. A university friend of Ariadne's brother, Mikhail Ivanich Lubkov, came to stay. He was a pleasant man, the kind of person the coachmen and footmen called an amusing gentleman. He was of medium height, thin, balding, with the face of a kindly but unremarkable bourgeois, pale, with stiff, well-groomed mustaches, a large Adam's apple, and goose flesh on his neck. He wore a pince-nez on a broad black cord and had a burr, unable to pronounce his R's or L's. He was always cheerful. Everything seemed funny to him. He had married quite stupidly at 20, received 2 houses in Moscow as a dowry, spent all his money renovating them and building a bathhouse, and went completely bankrupt. Now his wife and 4 children lived in a cheap hotel, enduring great hardship, while he had to support them, and even this he found hilarious. He was 36, and his wife was 42, and even that he found hilarious. His mother, a haughty, puffed-up woman with noble pretensions, despised his wife and lived apart from them with a whole pack of dogs and cats. He had to pay her an allowance of 75 rubles a month. Being a man of refined tastes, he liked to breakfast at the Slavyansky Bazaar and dine at the Hermitage. This required a great deal of money, but his uncle gave him only 2,000 a year. It was never enough, so he spent his days running about Moscow with his tongue out, so to speak, looking for someone to touch for a loan. And that, too, was hilarious. He had come to Kotlevich's estate, as he put it, to rest from his family life in the lap of nature. At lunch, at dinner, and during our walks, he would tell us about his wife, his mother, his creditors, and the bailiffs, laughing at all of them. He laughed at himself, too, claiming that his talent for borrowing money had led to many pleasant acquaintances. He laughed incessantly, and we laughed with him. With his arrival, our way of spending time changed. I was inclined toward quiet, idyllic pleasures. I loved fishing, evening strolls, and gathering mushrooms. Lubkov, however, preferred picnics, fireworks, and hunting with hounds. 3 times a week, he would organize a picnic. Ariadne, with a serious and inspired expression, would draw up a list: oysters, champagne, sweets, and send me off to Moscow to fetch them, never once asking, of course, if I had the money. And at these picnics, there were toasts, laughter, and more cheerful stories about how old his wife was, how fat his mother's dogs were, and what lovely people his creditors turned out to be. Lubkov loved nature, but he looked at it as something long familiar, something fundamentally inferior to him, created solely for his pleasure. He would stop before some magnificent landscape and remark, "This would be a fine spot to have a cup of tea." Once, spotting Ariadne in the distance walking with a parasol, he nodded toward her and said, "She's thin, and I like that. I can't stand plump women." I was revolted. I asked him not to speak of women that way in my presence. He looked at me with genuine surprise and said, "What's the harm in saying I like thin women and dislike plump ones?" I gave him no answer. Later, being in high spirits and slightly tipsy, he said, "I've noticed that Ariadne Grigoryevna likes you. I'm surprised you're so slow to act." His words made me uncomfortable, and in my embarrassment, I laid out my views on love and women. "I don't know," he sighed. "In my view, a woman is a woman, and a man is a man. Ariadne Grigoryevna may be poetic and lofty, as you say, but that doesn't mean she is exempt from the laws of nature. You can see for yourself, she is at an age where she needs a husband or a lover. I respect women no less than you do, but I believe that certain relations do not exclude poetry. Poetry is one thing, a lover is another. It's just like in farming. The beauty of nature is one thing, but the profit from the fields and forests is quite another. When Ariadne and I were fishing for gudgeon, Lubkov would lie nearby on the sand, teasing me or teaching me how to live. "I marvel at you, sir. How can you live without a romance?" he would say. "You're young, handsome, interesting, in short, a man in his prime. Yet you live like a monk. Oh, these old men of 28. I'm nearly 10 years older than you. But who among us is younger? Ariadne Grigoryevna." "You are, of course," Ariadne would reply. And when he grew bored with our silence and the intent way we watched our floats, he would head back to the house. She would look at me angrily and say, "Really, you aren't a man. You're just, God forgive me, a jellyfish. A man should be passionate, reckless, make mistakes, suffer. A woman will forgive you for being bold or even impudent, but she will never forgive this level-headedness of yours." She was genuinely angry. Once, during supper, without addressing me directly, she began to say that if she were a man, she wouldn't rot in the countryside but would travel, spend the winter abroad, in Italy, for instance. Oh, Italy! Here, my father unwittingly added fuel to the fire. He talked at length about Italy, how wonderful it was, the marvelous nature, the museums. Suddenly, Ariadne was consumed by a desire to go. She even struck the table with her fist, her eyes flashing. To go. Then began the endless talk of how wonderful it would be in Italy, all os and os every single day. When Ariadne looked at me over her shoulder, I saw by her cold, stubborn expression that in her dreams she had already conquered Italy, with all its salons, noble foreigners, and tourists, and that it was impossible to hold her back. I advised her to wait a little, to postpone the trip for a year or two, but she would grimace in disgust and say, "You are as cautious as an old woman." Lubkov naturally was all for the trip. He said it would be very cheap and that he, too, would happily go to Italy to take a break from his family life. I confess, I behaved as naively as a schoolboy, not out of jealousy, but from a premonition of something terrible and extraordinary. I tried, whenever possible, not to leave them alone together. They would make fun of me. For instance, when I entered a room, they would pretend they had just been kissing, and so on. But then, one fine morning, her stout, pale, spiritualist brother came to me and expressed a wish to speak in private. He was a man with no will. Despite his education and delicacy, he could never stop himself from reading someone else's letter if it lay before him on the table. Now, in our conversation, he admitted he had accidentally read a letter from Lubkov to Ariadne. From this letter, I learned that she is leaving for abroad very soon. My dear friend, I am terribly agitated. Explain it to me, for God's sake. I understand nothing. As he spoke, he breathed heavily right into my face, and he smelled of boiled beef. Forgive me for revealing the secrets of this letter, he continued. But you are Ariadne's friend. She respects you. Perhaps you know something. She wants to leave, but with whom? Mr. Lubkov intends to go with her. Forgive me, but this is quite extraordinary on Mr. Lubkov's part. He is a married man with children, yet he declares his love and addresses Ariadne as thou. Forgive me, but it is strange. I turned cold. My hands and feet went numb, and I felt a pain in my chest, as if a triangular stone had been placed there. Kotlovich sank into an armchair, exhausted, his arms hanging limp like whips. What can I do? I asked. Reason with her, convince her. Think of it. What is Lubkov to her? Is he a match for her? Oh, God, how terrible it is, how terrible, he went on, clutching his head. She has such wonderful prospects, Kotlovich continued, Prince Maktub and others. The prince adores her, and only last Wednesday his late grandfather, Ilarion, confirmed positively, clear as 2 times 2, that Ariadne would be his wife. Positively. Grandfather Ilarion is dead, of course, but he was a remarkably brilliant man. We summon his spirit every day. After that conversation, I didn't sleep all night. I wanted to shoot myself. In the morning, I wrote 5 different letters and tore them all to shreds. Then I sobbed in the barn, took some money from my father, and left for the Caucasus without saying goodbye. Of course, a woman is a woman and a man is a man. But is it really all as simple in our time as it was before the flood? Am I, a cultured man endowed with a complex spiritual nature, supposed to explain my intense attraction to a woman simply by the fact that her body is shaped differently than mine? Oh, how ghastly that would be! I want to believe that human genius, in its struggle with nature, has also fought against physical love as an enemy, and that even if it hasn't conquered it, it has at least succeeded in entangling it in a web of illusions, of brotherhood and true affection. For me, at least, love is not merely a function of my animal organism, like that of a dog or a frog. It is real love, where every embrace is spiritualized by a pure heart's impulse and respect for the woman. Indeed, a revulsion toward animal instinct has been cultivated over centuries through hundreds of generations. I have inherited it in my blood. It is part of my very being. If I now poeticize love, is it not as natural and necessary in our age as the fact that my ears are stationary and my body is not covered in fur? It seems to me that most cultured people think this way. For today, the absence of a moral and poetic element in love is treated as a form of atavism, a symptom of degeneration or madness. True, By poeticizing love, we imagine virtues in those we love that they often do not possess. This becomes a source of constant errors and constant suffering. But in my opinion, it is better this way. It is better to suffer than to settle for the idea that a woman is just a woman and a man is just a man. In Tiflis, I received a letter from my father. He wrote that on such and such a date, Ariadne Grigorievna had departed for abroad, intending to spend the whole winter there. A month later, I returned home. It was already autumn. Every week, Ariadne sent my father letters on scented paper. Very interesting letters, written in excellent literary style. I am of the mind that every woman is a potential writer. Ariadne described in great detail how difficult it had been to reconcile with her aunt and beg 1,000 rubles for the journey, and how long she had searched Moscow for some distant elderly relative to persuade her to travel along as a companion. This excess of detail smelled strongly of invention. I realized, of course, that she had no companion at all. Soon after, I received a letter from her myself, also scented and literary. She wrote that she missed me, missed my handsome, intelligent, adoring eyes, and reproachfully told me I was wasting my youth, rotting in the countryside when I could, like her, be living in paradise under the palms, breathing the scent of orange trees. She signed it, "The Ariadne you abandoned." 2 days later came another letter in the same vein, signed, "The one you forgot." My head was spinning. I loved her passionately. I dreamed of her every night. And now here she was, abandoned and forgotten. What was the point of it? Why? Add to that the rural boredom, the long evenings, the nagging thoughts about Lubkov. The uncertainty tortured me. It poisoned my days and nights until it became unbearable. I couldn't hold out any longer. I packed my bags and went. Ariadne had summoned me to Abbazia. I arrived there on a clear, warm day after a rainstorm, the drops still hanging from the trees. I stayed in the same enormous, Baroque-like dependence where Ariadne and Lubkov were living. They were not a home. I went to the local park, wandered through the alleys, and sat down. An Austrian general passed by, hands behind his back, wearing the same red stripes our generals wear. An infant was wheeled past in a carriage, the wheels squeaking on the damp sand. A withered old man with jaundice passed by, then a swarm of English women, a priest, and then the Austrian general again. Military musicians, just arrived from Fiume, trudged toward their stand with glittering brass. The music began. Have you ever been to Abbazia? It's a dingy little Slavic town with only one street. A street that stinks and is impossible to navigate after rain without galoshes. I had read so much, and always with such reverence, about this earthly paradise, that when I found myself cautiously crossing the narrow street with my trousers tucked up, buying tough pears from an old woman who, recognizing me as Russian, said Chidiri and David sat, I was filled with resentment and shame. I asked myself in bewilderment, where was I to go? What was I to do here? And whenever I inevitably ran into other Russians, deceived just as I had been, I felt only bitterness. There is a quiet bay here, with steamers and boats with multicolored sails. You can see Fiume and distant islands shrouded in a lilac haze. It would be picturesque if the view weren't blocked by hotels and their dependencies, built in that absurd, Philistine architecture by greedy tradesmen who have covered the entire green shore. As a result, in this paradise, you mostly see nothing but windows, terraces, and platforms with white tables and the black tailcoats of waiters. There is a park, the kind you find in every foreign resort nowadays. The dark, motionless, silent greenery of palms, the bright yellow sand on the paths, the vivid green benches, the blare of the soldiers' trumpets, and the general's red stripes. You get tired of it all in 10 minutes. And yet, for some reason, you are obliged to stay here for 10 days or 10 weeks. Dragging myself through these resorts, I became more and more convinced of how inconvenient and boring life is for the wealthy and well-fed, how sluggish their imagination is, how timid their tastes and desires. How much happier are those tourists, young and old, who have no money for hotels and stay wherever they can, admiring the sea from the mountaintops while lying on the green grass, walking on foot, seeing the forests and villages up close, observing the customs of the land, hearing its songs, and falling in love with its women. As I sat in the park, it began to grow dark. In the twilight, my Ariadne appeared, elegant and dressed like a princess. Behind her walked Lubkov, dressed in everything new and loose-fitting, probably bought in Vienna. "Why are you so angry?" he was saying. "What have I done to offend you?" Seeing me, she cried out with joy. If we hadn't been in a park, she would surely have thrown herself around my neck. She squeezed my hands tightly and laughed, and I laughed too, nearly weeping with emotion. Then came the questions: how was life in the country? How was my father? Had I seen her brother? And so on. She insisted that I look her in the eyes, and asked if I remembered the fishing, our little quarrels, the picnics. Honestly, how wonderful it all was, she sighed. "But we aren't bored here either," she said. "We have many acquaintances, my dear, my good man. Tomorrow I shall introduce you to a Russian family. Only, please, buy yourself another hat." She looked me over and grimaced. "Abbazia is not the countryside," she added. "One must become my elfo here." Later, we went to a restaurant. Ariadne laughed the whole time, acting playful and calling me dear, good, and clever, as if she couldn't believe her own eyes that I was with her. We sat there until 11 o'clock and parted very satisfied with the dinner and with each other. The next day, Ariadne introduced me to the Russian family as the son of a famous professor, our neighbor from the estate. With these people, she spoke only of estates and harvests, constantly citing me as an authority. She wanted to appear as a very wealthy landowner, and, in truth, she succeeded. She carried herself beautifully, like a true aristocrat, which by birth she indeed was. "But what do you think of my aunt?" she said suddenly, looking at me with a smile. We had a little spat, and she went off to Marin. Can you believe it? Later, as we walked in the park, I asked, "Which aunt were you talking about earlier? What aunt is this?" "It was a white lie," Ariadne laughed. "They mustn't know I'm traveling without a companion." After a moment's silence, she pressed closer to me and said, "Darling, be a dear and make friends with Lubkov. He is so miserable. His mother and his wife are simply ghastly." She addressed Lubkov as you, and when going to bed, she said goodbye to him just as she did to me. Until tomorrow. They lived on different floors. This gave me hope that it was all nonsense, that there was no romance between them, and I felt at ease when meeting him. So when he once asked me for a loan of 300 rubles, I gave them to him with great pleasure. Every day we walked and did nothing but walk. We wandered through the park, we ate, we drank. Every day, those conversations with the Russian family. Gradually, I grew accustomed to the fact that whenever I entered the park, I would inevitably meet the old man with jaundice, the priest, and the Austrian general, who carried a deck of small cards and sat down whenever possible to play solitaire, his shoulders twitching nervously. And the music played the same thing over and over. Back home in the village, I used to feel ashamed before the peasants when I went on a picnic or went fishing on a work day. Here, too, I felt ashamed before the waiters, the coachmen, and the workers I passed. It seemed to me they were all looking at me and thinking, "Why aren't you doing anything?" I felt this shame from morning till night, every single day. It was a strange, unpleasant, monotonous time, varied only by Lubkov borrowing 150 gulden from me. Upon getting the money, he would suddenly come to life, like a morphinist after a dose, and begin to laugh boisterously at his wife, himself, or his creditors. Then the rains began, and it turned cold. We went to Italy, and I telegraphed my father to beg him to send 800 rubles to Rome by wire. We stayed in Venice, Bologna, and Florence. In every city, we inevitably ended up in an expensive hotel where they charged us separately for light, service, heating, for the bread at breakfast, and for the right to dine in a private room. We ate an enormous amount. In the morning, they serve us café complet. At 1, there was lunch, meat, fish, some kind of omelet, cheese, fruit, and wine. At 6, a dinner of 8 courses with long intervals during which we drank beer and wine. At 9, tea. Before midnight, Ariadne would announce she was hungry and demand ham and soft-boiled eggs. We ate with her for company, and in the intervals between meals, we rushed through museums and galleries, plagued by the constant thought of not being late for lunch or dinner. I grew bored before the paintings. I longed to go home and lie down. I grew exhausted, my eyes searching for a chair, while I hypocritically repeated after the others, "How exquisite! So much atmosphere." Like engorged pythons, we noticed only shiny objects. Shop windows hypnotized us, and we admired fake brooches and bought heaps of useless, trivial things. It was the same in Rome. It was raining, and a cold wind was blowing. After a heavy lunch, we went to see St. Peter's. Because of our satiety and perhaps the bad weather, it made no impression on us whatsoever. We nearly quarreled, accusing each other of being indifferent to art. The money from my father arrived. I remember going to collect it in the morning. Lubkov came with me. "The present can never be full or happy when there is a past," he said. "The past has left me with heavy baggage around my neck. Of course, if I had money, it would be no trouble, but as it is, I am as naked as a jaybird. Would you believe it? I have only 8 francs left," he continued, lowering his voice, "and yet I must send 100 to my wife and the same to my mother. And one has to live here." Ariadne, like a child, refuses to understand the situation and flings money about like a duchess. "Why did she buy that watch yesterday? And tell me, why do we have to keep playing these good little children?" The fact that she and I hide our relationship from the servants and acquaintances costs us an extra 10 or 15 francs a day, because I have to take a separate room. What is it all for? A sharp stone turned in my chest. There was no more uncertainty. Everything was clear to me now. I went cold all over, and an immediate decision came to me. Never to see either of them again, to flee from them, to go home at once. Getting together with a woman is easy. Lubkov continued. You just have to undress her. But afterward, how heavy it all becomes. What a mess. When I was counting the money I had received, he said, "If you don't lend me 1,000 francs, I am doomed. This money of yours is my only resource." I gave it to him, and he instantly cheered up and began laughing at his uncle, that eccentric who couldn't keep his address secret from his wife. Back at the hotel, I packed my things and paid the bill. It only remained to say goodbye to Ariadne. I knocked at her door. Entrez. Her room was in a state of mourning disorder. Tea things on the table, a half-eaten roll, eggshells, a heavy, suffocating scent of perfume. The bed was unmade, and it was obvious that two had slept in it. Ariadne herself had only recently risen and was now in a flannel blouse, her hair uncombed. I said hello, then sat in silence for a minute while she tried to tidy her hair. I asked, my whole body trembling, "Why? Why did you ask me to come here abroad?" She evidently guessed what I was thinking. She took me by the hand and said, "I want you to be here. You are so pure." I felt ashamed of my agitation, of my trembling. What if I were to burst into tears? I walked out without saying another word, and an hour later I was sitting in a railway carriage. All the way home, for some reason, I kept imagining Ariadne as pregnant, and she was loathsome to me. All the women I saw in the carriages and at the station seemed pregnant to me too, and they were also loathsome and pitiable. I felt like a greedy, passionate miser who had suddenly discovered that all his gold coins were counterfeit. The pure, graceful images my imagination had cherished for so long, fueled by love, my plans, my hopes, my memories, my very views on love and women. Everything was now laughing at me and sticking out its tongue. Ariadne, I asked myself in horror. This young, remarkably beautiful, intelligent girl, a senator's daughter, involved with such a mediocre, uninteresting, vulgar little man. But why shouldn't she love Lubkov? I answered myself, is he any worse than I am? Oh, let her love whomever she pleases, but why lie about it? Then again, why should she be frank with me? And so it went round and round to the point of exhaustion. The train carriage was freezing. I was traveling first class, but we were three to a seat. There were no double windows, and the outer door opened directly into the compartment. I felt as if I were in shackles, cramped, abandoned, and pathetic. My feet were ice cold, yet at the same time, I kept remembering how seductive she had looked that day in her blouse with her hair undone. Suddenly, such fierce jealousy would seize me that I would leap up from the sheer mental pain, while my fellow passengers looked at me with surprise and even alarm. At home, I found snowdrifts and a 20-degree frost. I love winter. I love it because during that time, even in the bitterest cold, the house feels especially warm. It is pleasant, in a short sheepskin coat and felt boots, to do some work in the garden or the yard on a clear, frosty day, or to read in a well-heated room, sitting before the fireplace in my father's study, or to wash in our village bathhouse. But if there is no mother, sister, or children in the house, winter evenings feel eerie, unusually long and silent. The warmer and cozier it is, the more sharply you feel that absence. That winter, after my return from abroad, the evenings were long indeed. I was so wretched with longing that I couldn't even read. During the day, it was manageable, clearing snow in the garden or feeding the chickens and calves. But the evenings were unbearable. I used to dislike guests, but now I welcomed them, knowing the conversation would inevitably turn to Ariadne. Kotlovich, the spiritualist, came often to talk about his sister, sometimes bringing his friend Prince Maktub, who was no less in love with Ariadne than I was. To sit in Ariadne's room, to touch the keys of her piano, to look at her sheet music, this had become a necessity for the prince. He couldn't live without it. And the spirit of Grandfather Ilarion continued to prophesy that, sooner or later, she would be his wife. At our house, the prince would usually stay from lunch until midnight, saying nothing. He would silently drink 2 or 3 bottles of beer, only occasionally emitting a short, sad, rather foolish laugh to show he was following the conversation. Before leaving, he would always pull me aside and ask in a low voice, When did you last see Ariadne Grigorievna? Is she well? I trust she isn't bored there. Spring arrived. It was time for the evening woodcock shoot, then the sowing of spring corn and clover. I felt sad, but it was a spring-like sadness. I wanted to make peace with my loss. Working in the fields and listening to the larks, I asked myself, should I not simply settle the question of personal happiness once and for all? Should I not marry some simple peasant girl without any fuss? Then, at the height of the farm work, I received a letter with an Italian stamp. The clover, the apiary, the calves, the peasant girl, it all vanished like smoke. This time, Ariadne wrote that she was deeply, infinitely miserable. She reproached me for not stretching out a helping hand, but instead looking down at her from the heights of my virtue and abandoning her in her moment of danger. It was written in a large, nervous hand with smudges and blots. It was clear she was in a hurry and in pain. In conclusion, she implored me to come and save her. Once again, I was torn from my anchor and swept away. Ariadne was living in Rome. I arrived late in the evening, and when she saw me, she burst into sobs and threw herself around my neck. She hadn't changed at all over the winter. She was just as young and enchanting. We had supper together, and then drove around Rome until dawn. The whole time, she told me about her life. I asked where Lubkov was. "Don't mention that creature to me," she cried. "He is loathsome and disgusting." "But I thought you loved him," I said. "Never. At first, he seemed original and aroused my pity. That was all. He is insolent. He takes a woman by storm, and that is attractive. Let's not speak of him. It's a sad page in my life. He went back to Russia for money. In good riddance." I told him not to dare come back. She was no longer living in a hotel, but in a private apartment of 2 rooms, which she had furnished to her own taste, coldly and luxuriously. Since Lubkov's departure, she had run up debts of about 5,000 francs with her acquaintances. My arrival truly was a salvation for her. I had hoped to take her back to the countryside, but I failed. She longed for her homeland, but the memories of past poverty, of the hardships and the rusted roof of her brother's house, filled her with a shivering revulsion. When I suggested going home, she would squeeze my hands convulsively and say, "No, no, I'll die of boredom there." Then my love entered its final phase, its last quarter. "Be your old darling self. Love me just a little," Ariadne would say, leaning toward me. "You are so somber and rational. You're afraid to give in to an impulse, and you're always thinking of the consequences. It's so boring. Please, I beg you, be affectionate. My pure one, my saint, my dear. I love you so much." I became her lover. For a month at least, I was like a madman, experiencing nothing but rapture. To hold that young, beautiful body in one's arms, to enjoy it, to feel her warmth every time I woke and remember that she was there, she, my Ariadne. Oh, that is not something one gets used to easily. But I did get used to it, eventually. Gradually, I began to view my new position more consciously. First of all, I realized that Ariadne, just as before, did not love me. But she wanted to love seriously. She feared loneliness. And above all, I was young, healthy, and strong. She, like most cold people, was sensual, and so we both pretended we had come together out of a mutual, passionate love. Then I began to realize other things. We lived in Rome, in Naples, in Florence. We thought of going to Paris, but it seemed cold to us there. So we returned to Italy. Everywhere we introduced ourselves as husband and wife, wealthy landowners. People were eager to meet us, and Ariadne was a great success. Since she was taking painting lessons, she was called an artist, and imagine, it suited her very well, though she hadn't the slightest bit of talent. Every day, she slept until 2 or 3 in the afternoon. She had her coffee and breakfast in bed. At dinner, she would consume soup, lobster, fish, meat, asparagus, and game. And later, when she went to bed, I would bring her something more, roast beef, for example, which she would eat with a sad, preoccupied expression. And waking in the middle of the night, she would eat apples and oranges. The main, one might say the fundamental, trait of this woman was an astounding duplicity. She was cunning constantly, every single minute, apparently without any necessity, but as if by instinct, for the same reasons a sparrow chirps or a cockroach twitches its whiskers. She was cunning with me, with the waiters, with the porters, with the shopkeepers, with acquaintances. Not a single conversation, not a single meeting took place without affectation and posing. If a man entered our room, whoever he might be, a waiter or a baron, she would instantly change her look, her expression, her voice, and even the contours of her figure. If you had seen her then but once, you would have said there were no people more sophisticated or wealthy in all of Italy. She never let a single artist or musician pass without lying to him some nonsense about his remarkable talent. "You are such a talent," she would say in a sweet, melodious voice. "It's almost frightening to be near you. I think you must see right through people." And all of this was done just to please, to succeed, to be enchanting. She woke up every morning with a single thought: to please. That was the goal and meaning of her life. If I had told her that on such and such a street, in such and such a house, there lived a man who did not like her, it would have caused her serious suffering. Every day, she needed a charm to captivate, to drive someone mad. The fact that I was in her power, reduced to utter insignificance by her charms, gave her the same pleasure that victors once felt at tournaments. My humiliation was not enough. At night, sprawling like a tigress, uncovered, she was always hot. She would read the letters Lubkov sent her. He implored her to return to Russia, swearing he would rob or kill someone just to get the money to come to her. She hated him, yet his passionate, slavish letters thrilled her. She had an extraordinary opinion of her own charms. It seemed to her that if a great crowd could see how well-proportioned she was and the color of her skin, she would conquer all of Italy, the whole world. These talks about her physique and skin tone insulted me, and noticing this, whenever she was angry and wanted to spite me, she would say all sorts of vulgar things to tease me. It even reached the point where once, at a lady's villa, she grew furious and said to me, "If you don't stop pestering me with your moralizing, I'll strip naked right now and lie down on these flowers." Often, watching her sleep or eat, or seeing her try to give her gaze a naive expression, I thought, why did God give her this extraordinary beauty, grace, and intellect? Was it only to sprawl in bed, to eat, and to lie without end? And was she truly intelligent? She was afraid of 3 candles, of the 13th day of the month. She was terrified of the evil eye and bad dreams. She talked about free love and freedom in general like an old bigot, and insisted that Boleslav Markovic was a better writer than Turgenev. Yet she was devilishly cunning and witty, and in society she knew how to appear as a very educated, progressive person. It cost her nothing to insult a servant, even in a cheerful moment, or to kill an insect. She loved bullfights, loved reading about murders, and grew angry when defendants were acquitted. With the life Ariadne and I were leading, we needed a lot of money. My poor father sent me his pension, all his meager earnings. He borrowed from me wherever he could. When he finally replied to me with non-habeo, I sent him a desperate telegram begging him to mortgage the estate. A little later, I asked him to find money under a second mortgage. He did both without a word of protest and sent me every last kopeck. But Ariadne despised the practical side of life. None of this concerned her. While I, throwing away thousands of francs to satisfy her wild whims, groaned like an old tree, she would light-heartedly sing Addio, Bella Napoli. Gradually, I grew cold toward her and began to feel ashamed of our liaison. I did not like pregnancy or childbirth, but now I sometimes dreamed of a child who might serve as at least a formal justification for the life we led. To keep from loathing myself completely, I began visiting museums and galleries and reading books, ate little, and gave up drinking. If you drive yourself hard from morning till night, your soul feels a bit lighter. Ariadne grew tired of me, too. Moreover, the people she had success with were all mediocre. There were still no ambassadors or salons, and money was running low. This offended her and moved her to tears. Finally, she announced that she wouldn't mind returning to Russia. And so, here we are, on our way. In the final months before our departure, she was diligently corresponding with her brother. She clearly has some secret plans, but God only knows what they are. I'm tired of trying to penetrate her ruses. But we aren't going to the countryside. We're going to Yalta, and from Yalta to the Caucasus. Now, she can only live in resorts. And if you knew how much I hate all these resorts, how stifled and ashamed I feel in them, how I long for the village now. I want to work, to earn my bread by the sweat of my brow, to atone for my mistakes. I feel an excess of strength in me now, and I believe that by exerting this strength, I could buy back the estate in 5 years. But here, as you see, is the complication. This isn't abroad. This is Mother Russia. I have to think about legal marriage. Of course, the infatuation has passed. There isn't a trace of the old love left. But be that as it may, I am duty-bound to marry her. Shamokhin, agitated by his story, and I went below deck and continued to talk about women. It was late. It turned out that he and I were sharing the same cabin. Only in the villages is woman not lagging behind man, Shamokhin said. There, she thinks, feels, and struggles with nature in the name of culture just as diligently as man does. But the urban, bourgeois, intellectual woman has long since fallen behind and is returning to her primitive state. Half of her is already a human beast, and because of her, much of what was conquered by human genius has already been lost. Woman is gradually disappearing. In her place sits the primitive female. This backwardness of the intellectual woman poses a serious danger to culture. In her regressive movement, she tries to drag man down with her and halts his progress. This is beyond doubt. I asked him why he generalized. Why judge all women by Ariadne alone? Surely the very aspiration of women toward education and equal rights, which I see as a quest for justice, excludes any idea of a regressive movement. But Shamokhin hardly listened to me and smiled incredulously. He was already a passionate, convinced misogynist, and it was impossible to change his mind. "Oh, enough," he interrupted. "As long as a woman sees in me not a human being, not an equal, but a male, and spends her whole life worrying about nothing but how to please me, that is, how to possess me, then how can there be any talk of equal rights? Oh, don't believe them. They are very, very cunning. We men fret about their freedom, but they don't want that freedom at all. They only pretend to want it. Terribly cunning, frightfully cunning. I was already tired of arguing and wanted to sleep. I turned my face to the wall. "Yes, sir," I heard him say as I was drifting off. "Yes, sir. And our upbringing is to blame for it all, my dear fellow. In the cities, the entire upbringing and education of a woman, in its very essence, boils down to turning her into a human beast. That is, making her pleasing to the male and teaching her how to conquer that male." "Yes, sir," Shamokhin sighed. "Girls should be raised and educated together with boys, so they're always together. A woman must be raised so that she knows, like a man, how to admit when she is wrong. Otherwise, in her own mind, she is always right. Instill in a girl from her cradle that a man is, first and foremost, not a suitor or a groom, but her fellow human being, her equal in everything. Train her to think logically, to generalize, and do not assure her that her brain weighs less than a man's and that she can therefore be indifferent to science, art, and cultural goals in general. A young apprentice, a cobbler or a house painter, also has a smaller brain than a grown man, yet he participates in the general struggle for existence. He works, he suffers. We must also drop this habit of citing physiology, pregnancy, and childbirth because, first of all, a woman does not give birth every month. Secondly, not all women give birth. And thirdly, a normal peasant woman works in the fields right up until the birth, and nothing happens to her. Furthermore, there must be absolute equality in everyday life. If a man offers a lady a chair or picks up a dropped handkerchief, let her do the same for him. I would have nothing against a girl from a good family helping me on with my coat or bringing me a glass of water. I heard nothing more, for I fell asleep. The next morning, as we were approaching Sevastopol, the weather was unpleasantly damp. There was a slight swell. Shamokhin sat with me in the deck house, lost in thought and silent. When the bell rang for tea, men with their coat collars turned up and ladies with pale, sleepy faces began to go below. One lady, young and very beautiful, the same one who had been angry with the customs officials in Wolochisk, stopped in front of Shamokhin and said to him with the expression of a capricious, spoiled child, "Jean, your little bird is seasick." Later, while living in Yalta, I saw this beautiful lady galloping on a pacer, with two officers barely able to keep up with her. One morning, I saw her sitting on the embankment in a Phrygian cap and a little apron, painting a sketch, while a large crowd stood at a distance, admiring her. I made her acquaintance too. She squeezed my hand very, very firmly and, looking at me with admiration, thanked me in a sweet, melodious voice for the pleasure my writings gave her. "Don't believe her," Shamokhin whispered to me. "She hasn't read a word of yours." Once, toward evening, as I was walking along the embankment, I ran into Shamokhin. He was carrying large parcels of snacks and fruit. "Prince Maktub is here," he said joyfully. "He arrived yesterday with her spiritualist brother. Now I understand what she was corresponding with him about. Good Lord," he continued, looking up at the sky and pressing the parcels to his chest. "If things work out with the prince, it means freedom. I can go back to the country then, to my father." And he ran on. "I'm beginning to believe in spirits," he shouted back to me, looking over his shoulder. The spirit of Grandfather Ilarion seems to have prophesied the truth. Oh, if only it were so. The day after this meeting, I left Yalta, and how Shamokhin's romance ended, I do not know.